Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How does Kapil Sibal respond to the criticisms of his educational reforms? That's the key issue I shall explore today with the Human Resources Development Minister, Kapil Sibal himself. Mr. Sibal, let me start with a simple question. On the 25th of June at your press conference, did you throw up ideas for public debate or did you announce decisions taken by the government?
Well, Karan, let me be very clear. The press release that I issued on that day suggested that there are some issues that were merely ideas, there were some that were decisions, there were some initiatives of policy, some decisions and initiatives in legislation. Now, there were different categories of policy formulations and initiatives in legislation and processes started by me. Unfortunately, the press misinterpreted all that by saying everything that I said was a decision.
So just to clarify, because there has been an impression created both on television and papers that everything you announced is a decision to which the government is irrevocably committed. You're now saying to me that some of the things were decisions, others were ideas for discussion,
Absolutely.
Yet others were ideas for exploration.
Absolutely, and that's reflected in the press release itself, because it was a written press release. Which idea was for discussion, which ideas were for exploration, which were decisions, are all set out there.
One of the reasons why there was confusion is because at the same time you made it clear that this was your ministry's agenda for the first 100 days.
That's correct.
Can an agenda consist of things that are not decisions?
Well, absolutely, because how does government function? Government functions by putting ideas and issues in the public domain through the ministry. And if the minister comes and says, this is my 100-day agenda, I would like some of these things to be discussed, but some of these things I'm doing anyway. Okay, that's how public discussion and debate takes place in a democracy, and that's how it should happen.
So when a minister comes and says that these are some things that I'm putting in the public domain, I'd like them discussed, are you also saying to me that you are open to not just public debate, but listening to what the public says and adding, amending, altering some of your ideas to take on board?
Absolutely. I mean, these things evolve. I mean, when we put this out, you must understand that we did a lot of work. In other words, there's already a lot of public discussion gone into this. For example...
But that's inside your ministry with your officials.
Take, for example, the National Curriculum Framework of 2005. That itself, there was a huge process of interaction with the public before the framework was put in place. So there is a public framework already in place. Now, if I want to take it forward, there is already public discussion, but I'm still willing to listen to the public.
So, in fact, when you say you're still willing to listen to the public, some of the ideas, maybe many of the ideas that you threw up can be amended, can be altered with public debate.
It should be. That's what democracy is all about.
So it's quite possible then that some of the things that you threw up as ideas may in the end not happen because you may decide that the public debate has overtaken them.
It's possible. It is certainly in the domain of possibility it may happen. But when I put these in the public domain, there is my initial prima facie conclusion that these are good for the country. These educational reforms are required. But if there is, say, if there is a public outcry that this is absolutely not possible, and I feel that there is a rationale in that, I certainly will not go ahead with it.
When you say that at the time you put these in the public domain, you believe that these are good ideas for the country, did you at any point talk to the Prime Minister, share these ideas with him before you made them public?
On many of the issues that I have put in the press release, many of them are consistent with Congress policy. For example, let me take foreign direct investment. You saw the economic survey that was put out day before yesterday. That itself talks about foreign direct investment in education sector. So many of these things are already either in the President's address or in the National Curriculum Framework, or they are part of the economic survey, or they are pronouncements made by government earlier.
That I fully understand. But did you actually have a discussion with the Prime Minister before that press conference?
Well, this is not something that I can answer, publicly, whether I had a discussion on each of these issues.
Only for one question. No, only for one reason why I asked.
The Prime Minister himself, let me put it bluntly, is extremely keen that the education sector needs reform.
Okay, the reason I ask you whether you had consulted or spoken to the Prime Minister is because it's now become apparent from the press that at least 5 Congress-ruled state governments have expressed some measure of disagreement or dissent with some of your suggestions. That's why I
Only on one issue.
The issue of the board exam.
Exactly.
In fact, the 2 board exam issues, the 10th and the 12th.
Yes.
And that's quite critical because that's a section of your reforms that has attracted most attention. So Is that something that the Prime Minister is on board with?
First of all, let's be clear that the states have entirely misunderstood what I said. What I said in my press conference and in my press release, that I am not going to touch the state boards at all. I said that the 10th class optional option that I'm going to give to students will apply only to schools throughout India, which are about 10,000 in number, which are affiliated to the CBSE system, and that go up to class 12.
I understand.
So therefore the state boards are not concerned with it. So any state government which thinks that I'm tinkering with their state board examination system have not either read the press release or seen me give the, at the press conference making those statements.
You've usefully clarified the basis on which states may have misunderstood. You've explained that this doesn't affect state boards, it only affects CBSE schools, and that too only CBSE schools that go up to the 12th.
Exactly.
And there it's become optional, it's not been scrapped.
Exactly.
But let me come back, because senior leaders of the Congress party, as reported by Mail Today and The Pioneer, have expressed some measure of disagreement or dissent, because state governments ruled by your party have expressed disagreement and dissent. I come back to this issue. Are the Prime Minister and Mrs. Gandhi on board?
Well, again,
have they been consulted?
Let me say this to you. Take, for example, the 10th board exam.
But you're not
That's
answering
nothing.
my question.
No, I'm answering the question. It doesn't even have to go to cabinet.
In other words,
so you are asking a question.
This is within the minister's prerogative to do.
It is within, why? Because the CBSE system comes within the ministry.
Quite right. So there's no need. So there's no need for you to consult the Prime Minister.
But whether I did or not is a separate issue. There is no need.
There's no need.
Absolutely.
But whether you did or not is a separate issue. Yes. Won't you give me some hint of whether you did?
That's not, what we discuss with Mrs. Gandhi, what we discuss with the Prime Minister is not something for public disclosure.
All right, let's come to the 2-3 proposals that have attracted most attention in the press. First is the idea of making the 10th board optional. You say you're doing it because you want to de-traumatize education, but I put it to you that exams are not the real cause of trauma. The real cause of trauma is the competitiveness of the system, because there simply aren't enough seats for higher education compared to the demand. As a result of which, the cutoff keeps getting higher and higher, and there's then on top of that parental pressure. Are you not targeting the wrong cause of trauma?
Not at all, not at all. Incidentally, if you again look at my press release, it says I will start the process of reforming the examination system in the context of the National Curriculum Framework of 2005.
So
it's across the board. You people have only talked about class 10.
But when you say it's across the board, are you saying that the entire approach of teachers to education, as well as a move away from exams to grades and continual assessment, all of that will happen?
All of that should happen.
Will it all happen simultaneously?
No, we'll see how much time it takes, but the discussion should take place, a public debate should take place, and whatever we think is best for the students of this country to de-traumatize them, to ensure that the examination system is more objective, and that marks is not the only basis on which you judge a person. All that will happen.
But then you're indicating to me that if all this has to happen so as to enable the 10th board exam to become optional, then you're talking of a process that could take 2-3 years, not something that's going to happen in 6 months or 8 months.
Not necessarily. As I said, the National Curriculum Framework is already in place, which suggests all these things. We'll have a little
suggests the implementation will take much more time.
No, not necessarily. Many schools are already implementing.
Then let me put it like this. How quickly could you have optional?
Within a year.
Within a year, the 10th board exam can become optional.
Could be.
Could be suggests maybe, not just a possibility.
Yes, could be.
A real possibility.
Yes, a real possibility.
Let's come to the second big idea that you've thrown up that's attracted a lot of attention, the idea of having a uniform single national board at class 12. Now, the problem is Professor Yashpal says this is not one of his recommendations, and more importantly, he adds, I cannot understand how we can talk of standardizing syllabus and academic content across the country.
I didn't say any of that.
But just a moment.
I didn't say any of that.
I know you didn't say it, but if you're going to have a single uniform 12th board, then you have to standardize syllabus and content.
No, not necessarily. There's a lot of diversity in India, right? So as you move along the school system, each state, each board is entitled to lay focus on certain issues till class 8, class 9, class 10.
But I'm talking about class 12.
I'm coming to that. When you come to class 12 and you have, say, a subject like mathematics, there can be no regional diversification in mathematics. A subject like physics, a subject like chemistry, a subject like English literature.
Well, actually,
no,
yes.
No, I'm just...
sorry. Forgive me. When it comes to the social sciences, when it comes to history, when it comes to literature, different school boards emphasize different aspects. No. And if you don't standardize the syllabus, then you've got a problem having a uniform board.
Let's look at the state boards. You know, the pass potential in state boards in India is 27%. I want to answer that question.
But you're not answering it.
I am answering it. I am answering it. I'm saying that uniformity does not mean uniformity in teaching. Uniformity means uniformity of standard.
Yes, but uniformity of standard requires a uniformity of syllabus, a uniformity of content. Different teachers will teach differently.
First of all, this is a long-term goal, and I believe in it.
Okay, now that's the important thing. That's what I was getting at. If you agree and accept that this is a long-term goal, are you saying that this issue, a standard uniform board for the 12th, can't happen in 6 months, 8 months? It will take 2 or 3 years.
I said 5.
5 years.
In fact, at my press conference, I said it's not part of the 100-day agenda. This is something that India has to move towards, and it will take at least 5 years to do that.
Will it happen?
Because we will have to take the state boards, governments on board.
Will it happen in the lifetime of this government?
I hope so.
But it may not.
I hope so. It may not, but I hope so. I would like to.
The last issue that's attracted a lot of attention is your suggestion that you will pass a new law to regulate the entry and operation of foreign universities. Now, the problem is that despite the fact the press and large sections of industry have warmly welcomed the idea, members of your own government have opposed it. In fact, the truth is that Jairam Ramesh has said to Mail today, and I quote, "Our universities are in bad shape and lack infrastructure facilities. We are not even able to pay decent salaries to our teachers. In this situation, allowing foreign universities to open shop is not a practical idea."
Well, I'm afraid the economic survey which puts this out day before yesterday is obviously inconsistent with the statement that you have mentioned.
So then shouldn't Mr. Jairam Ramesh keep his mouth quiet in public, because it embarrasses the government for ministers to say different things?
I'm not going to comment on a colleague. I have deep respect for my colleagues.
But he doesn't have deep respect for your suggestions.
It really does not matter. It really doesn't.
You're not embarrassed by him speaking in this way?
I'm certainly not embarrassed.
One last question. Will these universities, if they open branches in India, have to fulfill the reservation requirements that apply to SC, ST and OBC?
When this legislation is in the form of a draft is ready, it's not even gone to the cabinet. And I don't think it's fair for me to start discussing the nitty-gritty of the legislation in public.
That's a much better answer to the one you gave on the day itself on television, when in fact you said quite outspokenly that yes, reservations will apply. Now you're suggesting that they may not apply.
No. I said it depends. Somebody asked me the question. I said it depends on the nature of the institution. Supposing it's a simple BA degree, why should resolutions not apply? Reservations not apply. I did not say reservations shall apply. It was a rhetorical answer. If it's a simple, college that is opening up of a foreign university which is giving a simple BA degree, why should it not follow the law of the land? But that's not something that we have decided. These are issues that will be discussed. These are issues that will be debated, and there'll be specialists in the field who will look at these issues and decide.
You've given me a clear answer. On this, the government hasn't as yet made up its mind.
Absolutely.
And therefore it is possible, or at least conceivable, that reservations may not apply.
Absolutely. It's possible. But that all depends on what we decide when we move forward. But as I said, if you ask my personal opinion, for simple degrees like BA, I don't see why reservations should not apply. But that's my personal opinion. It may be overruled by the cabinet.
Let's take a break at that point. I want to come back and come to the subject that many believe is the real crisis in Indian education and ask how you propose to tackle it. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an interview with the new Human Resources Development Minister, Kapil Sibal. Mr. Sibal, let's come to an issue that many consider the real crisis in Indian education, the appalling state of primary schools in village India. And yet on the 25th of June, I don't think I heard you say very much about that. Why?
Well, no, I said the Right to Education Bill will be passed.
But the Right to Education Bill is something different to improving the standard of quality of education in the schools.
Not at all. It's exactly the same.
Well, let me tell you.
There's a concept of what is called a neighborhood school. That means there has to be a neighborhood school in every habitation.
Well, in fact, that's very close to something that is a specific part of the Congress manifesto. It's a commitment which, if fulfilled, would breathe enormous life into village schools.
Exactly.
And I'm going to quote it to you, Because the problem is you didn't say anything about it on the 25th of June. Here's the commitment. You will add one more model school in every block every year for the next 5 years.
Yes.
But you didn't say a word about that on the 25th of June.
Once the right to education bill comes in, it's automatically going to happen.
Well, it may not automatically happen. The right to education simply guarantees the right to education.
No.
This talks about...
No, I'm sorry. It doesn't just guarantee. It says within 3 years these schools will be built.
But why did you not make specific mention?
Because it's all
so
included.
Important.
I mean, these are I was talking about legislative initiatives. I was not extrapolating policy.
But you left a very important thing to people to assume and work out rather than say yourself up front.
I am reiterating it, that this is paramount as far as we are concerned. Schools in every habitation, model schools, quality schools, government schools, free schools is crucial.
Will you fulfill this commitment in your manifesto of one more model school in each block, each year for 5 years?
I will fulfill the commitment under the right to education bill, and that will encompass all this.
A second commitment in your manifesto, which many believe would breathe life into village primary schools, is the commitment for a major program for training of teachers and improving the physical environment in schools. Again, on the 25th of June, you didn't say too much.
I did. It's part of the press release. There's a whole new program of teachers training.
Well, in a mild, indirect form only, not in terms of a major program for training of teachers.
It is a major program. We're going to overhaul the entire system. It's set out there in the press release.
So this is a full-fledged commitment that you will fulfill.
Absolutely.
Let me say why I mentioned this. The reason why I focused in part 2 upon what I call the real crisis in Indian education is because many people believe that your reforms, as they were enunciated, haven't focused on village level education and rural education problems. Instead, they focused on urban problems, as a result of which you're perceived to be thinking of reforms that help the middle class, who are a minority, not the village poor, who are a majority.
On the contrary, if you were, you must have heard my press statement on that day. I started by saying that most newspapers and the electronic media talk about 12% of the people who move to graduation, which is higher education, and forget about 88% of the people. And my focus in the next 5 years is on that 88%. And I'm sorry that you've even asked me this question, because that's how I started my press conference.
Except for the fact that all the coverage on television and the papers
that's your privilege. That's your privilege.
Are you saying to me that the press not only misunderstood you, as you pointed out in part 1, about what are decisions, what are ideas, and what are simply issues for exploration, but they've also misunderstood you in terms of the focus and emphasis?
Absolutely. This is what I said at the outset, and you can, if you go and see the, a video of that, you will find that what I'm saying is right.
Except for the fact that this impression has now continued for 2 weeks, and you haven't actually corrected it. Why didn't you correct it earlier?
The press carries the stories it wants to carry,
but ministers
for the reasons that it wants to. That's why I'm here. That's why you are having this interview with me.
So you've actually used this opportunity to correct the impression that Kapil Sibal's not just talking about middle-class urban reforms, but rural reforms that affect the majority.
88% of the people in India who are not talked about, this education reform is for them.
So let me end by putting a blunt question. Are you really assuring me that at the end of 5 years, assuming you remain Minister of HRD for all 5 years, village schools in India will be booming, they'll have teachers who know how to teach, they'll have physical infrastructure that actually allows classes to be held?
I can honestly say that as a minister, I will try my best, make the best possible efforts to do that. A lot of these reforms are very difficult when you need to implement them at the village level. We need cooperation from the state governments.
But you're not now making excuses to explain failure.
No excuses. You need cooperation from the panchayats. And I think if all stakeholders in this cooperate, this shall be done. But from my side, I will not leave a stone unturned to make it happen.
Kapil Sibal, that must be music to the 80% of Indians who live in villages and have schools where there are no teachers, or teachers where there are no schools. Let's hope you actually deliver.
Thank you.
A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.